Happy New Year and welcome to another episode of the video podcast brought to you by ANZAM with me, your host Hafsa. Today I'm joined by Dr. Marissa Edwards. Marissa is an education focused lecturer at the UQ Business School at the University of Queensland. She holds a Bachelor of Psychological Science with honours, a graduate certificate in higher education, and a PhD in management from the University of Queensland. Her major research interests are mental health and mental illness in academia, PhD student well-being, and voice and organizational justice. She is the incoming co-chief editor of the Journal of Management Education, with her term beginning in July 2021. In her spare time, Marissa loves seeing live music and spending time with her rescue dog, Ziggy. Welcome, Marissa.
Thanks so much for having me.
Lovely to have you. So, there's some very interesting things in that I've used for your bio. So tell us about your journey of how you got interested in mental health in academia.
So, I think that everyone, to an extent, studies what they are interested in and what they're really invested in. And I've always had a bit of an interest in stress in organizations and mental health. And a lot of my undergraduate degree was in looking at clinical psychology. So I had a little bit of a background around it. And then I've been teaching for a long time, casual tutoring since 2006. And I found myself at times really struggling with the workload of a casual tutor. And I'm sure that people can relate to this. You're trying to take on as much work as you can. You're trying to publish at the same time. You're trying to do all of these things in the hope, for many people, of getting a continuing appointment. And at times I found the workload really difficult. And in particular, in 2014, I went through a period in which I became very burnt out. I had my previous dog die, I had a friend pass away, and I stopped sleeping through the night. And I was also teaching 3 courses, coordinating courses and also tutoring and lecturing. And it was a really difficult time. And I've written about this in a blog online. And luckily, I managed to get through that semester, but it was excruciating at times. Just, I was so tired. When you don't sleep, you are much more likely to experience really high levels of anxiety because of the neurobiology involved in sleep deprivation. And I thought, this is difficult. I don't know how many other people might experience this from time to time, but this is really hard. I can see you're indicating there. And I also looked around me and I had a lot of friends who were struggling, especially while they were writing their PhD thesis and also in that period afterwards. I know many colleagues who have needed to take time away from their PhD because of stress-related issues. They're getting sick more often. They feel overwhelmed with the workload. I know of people at several universities who have experienced clinical depression, clinical levels of anxiety, eating disorders, substance use disorders while completing their PhD. And I thought, why are so many people struggling? What's going on here? And these were people who had a great supervisor, they had a really interesting topic. In many cases, they had funding available, but people were having a really hard time. And I started to look around in the academic literature and I realized that this is not an uncommon experience. In fact, the research indicates that anywhere between 30% and 50% of PhD students are at risk of experiencing a diagnosable mental illness. So obviously the rates vary between studies and locations. Most of the research comes out of Europe and a little bit out of the US, but a sizable percentage of PhD students are struggling. And I thought, why is this happening? I'm not saying a PhD is easy, but why are people struggling to this extent? And that was really why I became interested in this topic. And since then, there has been a lot of interest. There have been many publications. It's a really emerging topic right now. So people are contacting me frequently wanting speeches and wanting presentations, and especially with COVID, it's become even more topical. So that's how I became interested in it, and it's really become my passion. It's what I focus on in all of my research now, and I like to think that it's an area in which I can make a real difference and have an impact.
Mm. But that is very interesting because the statistics that you mentioned, which is the 30 to 50%, is is really high, isn't it? It's and
Yes.
considering in academia, we really want more future lecturers who are doing PhDs and are those knowledge seekers. This is really an area, and good on you for choosing this area, because this and about trying to make that difference, because you seem really passionate about it. And
I am.
yeah, so could you tell me how your role has now evolved in this space, in this area?
Yeah, so I began by doing some conference presentations, and I wrote a book chapter with Neil Ashkenazi and Gemma King about promoting well-being in doctoral students. But I suppose the major contribution that I've made so far is a special issue. I'd like to think it's a contribution. It's only just been published, but I hope that it will make a difference. It's a special issue of the Journal of Management Education. It was just published this month. It just came out online first throughout the year last year, but it just came out in print this month, about mental health and psychological well-being in management educators and management students. And this was really a labour of love for me over the last 18 months to 2 years. I got to experience what it was like as an associate editor of a journal for the first time. And so I've spent a lot of time reading manuscripts, hearing about people's stories, and reading about various studies that they've done into mental health. And so I feel like that's been a significant thing that I've done so far. I think also it's really resonated with people. So at Twitter, we've had lots of responses as the authors. People have become really engaged in the topic. I think this is something that is not often spoken about in academia. We, like people in many professions, we have to try and we look like we're coping all the time. We wear this mask, especially when we're dealing with students. And especially when perhaps we don't have a continuing position. People who are on casual contracts and even fixed term contracts, it's very stressful. So I like to think I have become somewhat of an advocate for mental health in academic settings. At every opportunity, I'm saying we need to look at workloads. Workloads seem to be a huge issue in contributing to stress. We need to look at the increasing managerialism in business schools around the world. We need to see what that's doing to people, having lack of role clarity, having role overload. So I think that through the special issue, I've connected with the academic space, but I'm also the founder or the co-founder and also the curator of a blog called Voices of Academia. And this was something that emerged from speaking to some fellow mental health advocates at Twitter. And I connected with Zoe Ayres, who is located in the UK, who is just the most fabulous, amazing person who's doing so much for mental health. And what I realized is that there were some academic pieces emerging. I don't want to say there were a lot, but there were some studies coming out about mental health. But what I find really useful are those anecdotal pieces in which people talk about their experiences. And I'd seen a couple of blogs, but I hadn't really found a central place where people could post blogs about their experience with mental illness or their experience recovering from mental illness. So I founded Voices of Academia, which you can go to at voicesofacademia.com, and you can read a whole variety of blog posts from academics around the world about, we have posts about coping with bipolar disorder, we have posts about eating disorders, about some of the struggles about returning to work after having children, because that can be quite stressful. We have issues with supervisors, posts about bullying. We've got a whole range of things. Recently, also, I'd like to point out, we had a post from a very senior professor who had worked at, I think, MIT and Harvard. And she, on paper, she made the point that she looked incredible. She had every single possible award that you could have as an academic, but she detailed in her blog the struggles that she had gone through, the fact that she had been in therapy, doing DBT for a very long time, dialectical behavior therapy. And she said, on paper, in front of people, I looked incredible, but I was really struggling. And she said she wanted to write that blog to show people that you can be successful, that people with mental illness do exist in academia. They struggle, but in many cases, they are able to survive and thrive. And often it's those stories that we really need to hear, that mental illness should not be a barrier to working in any occupation. But in academia, there are actually some real advantages in that often you can connect with students and you can use your lived experience to support them. So I think that the blog has been probably the most impactful aspect of my work so far. We've had people write to us and say, because of your blog, I went and saw my GP and I got a referral for therapy. And now I'm feeling like I'm coping. Or because of your blog, I've been able to talk to my partner, or I've been able to open up to my colleagues and my friends. To me, that is impact. Not having A-star publications, but doing work that connects with people and that really makes a difference in their lives. And I'm not saying it's world-changing, the blog, but we do know from lots of emails and from comments at Twitter that people are really connecting with it, because we need to share our stories of mental health and mental illness and recovery.
I think and I'm struggling for words. So the first thing was, in terms of the the testimonials or people who have read it and have come back to you. That is a very powerful thing to have, isn't it? To say that actually people recognize that they're not in this alone. And your point about having the A star journals, again, the idea of impact. I think there needs to be in future. Perhaps that is the driver of the stress. Who knows? And it
It
could be.
contributes. Publish or perish is a major issue that contributes to stress. We know that from published research and anecdotal evidence.
Yeah. So, that's something for the academic industry or field to pick up on, in terms of how they start to define impact, and what is it that we really care about as a business, as a group of business scholars, perhaps. So talking about the blog, and also about, you've mentioned about the special issue from the Journal of Management Education, which you've called your labor of love. Do you want to, I'd be very keen to find out what kind of articles you've got in there.
Sure. So we had so many submissions. It was so gratifying to see that people were really engaging with this topic. I think it has been one of those hidden topics for a long time, and people are really interested in sharing their empirical work, theoretical work. We accept lots of different papers at JME. And in the end, we selected 5 papers that we thought were excellent quality, would really hopefully start a real conversation around mental health and well-being in academia within business schools. So we had a couple of papers, and the first one, when I read it, I thought, this is really special. This is really what I'd love all academics to read. If I had one paper, I'd recommend this one. This was by Maria Quijada, and she talked about her experience of clinical depression as a tenure track academic in the United States. And she discussed the impact that clinical depression had on her productivity in the workplace, how difficult it was when she was held to essentially some of the same standards as all of her other colleagues. She hadn't disclosed her illness. And when she did disclose her illness, she felt that there was some, it was a difficult experience. I'll put it like that. I'll refer you to the article if you want to read about it in depth. But she found that it was a struggle. And she made the point that academics with a mental illness, and hers was diagnosed, she was medicated, she was doing all the things you need to do, she was getting therapy. She said that we do need to recognise depression and anxiety and other conditions as real illnesses that do impact us. We can try really hard, but at the end of the day, it's an illness, and we need to take that into account. She talked about the fact that we need to look at adjusting the tenure clock. We need to look at PhD deadlines and submission deadlines and take those into account when someone has a mental illness, because placing them under the same pressure and holding them to the same standards as other people, it can be very, very stressful, and it can actually exacerbate some of the illness. And so I think that particular essay was so moving, and I think hopefully will have a real impact on how we view people who are struggling with mental health issues. We have a couple of other papers. They're all wonderful, but I know Maria's essay, we've just had so much feedback already. We had a couple of other ones as well. We also had an article by Nicholas Rue and colleagues, again from the United States, and they talked about the importance of taking time out and engaging in self-care as academics, something that we don't possibly do too often, and it's something that I think I'd advocate for people to do. And they talked about the degree of work stress that we face as academics, and then they talked about recovery narratives and things that they had done to recover from the stress of work. And they had 6 different vignettes, the authors. Some of them talked about going swimming, some of them talked about playing golf, others talked about singing or going on a rural retreat and doing marking. And that particular essay, I think, is really interesting because it highlights the fact that maybe we don't take enough time out of our jobs, and talks about some of the things that we can do as academics to engage in our own self-care. We had a couple of other articles. One was by Wei and Bunjin, and they talked about the impact of racism on the mental health of international students. And international students are obviously very important in the Australian market. We have many of them. And I think sometimes we can lose a little bit of perspective around their experiences, and we may not be able to appreciate what they're going through. And unfortunately, racism, and we don't want an international student in our group. I'm sure that we've all heard those things. Those kind of issues can come up. And these authors talked about some of the interventions that they've looked at and some of that they've actually experienced and implemented. So providing international students with greater connections, social connections, and also setting up minority peer networks to provide those students with connections and support. So I think that article is also really important reading for educators because it highlights some of the issues that our international students face. I don't think that they're unique to the United States or even other countries. We had another article about positive emotions and creating a positive emotions project, which Maria Hamdani included in her classroom. And this was based on a clinical wellbeing course, and she, over time, taught her students 8 wellbeing skills such as gratitude, formal mindfulness, positive reappraisal, and she taught this as part of a 5-week instructional program, linked that to assessment, and then she collected data, and what she found was that students did benefit from the training, both in terms of their well-being and also in terms of their positive affect. So, excuse me, I think that it's a really nice example of something that instructors can do if they want to impact well-being of students. So it's a nice, it's like an intervention. So if you'd like to integrate that into your courses, there is a full article with different examples of assessment and learning activities that you can do. And then our final article was about it was by Adam Pervez and colleagues. And this was looking at mental health in doctoral students, which I think I should point out, has traditionally been neglected. In universities, we've usually looked at undergraduate students, and we know that they often struggle. 1 in 5 students has a diagnosable mental illness. PhD students have kind of fallen through the cracks. But more recently, there's been a lot more attention. If you look at the literature, a lot of the studies are looking into PhD students finally, which I think is a really important aspect. So Adam and his colleagues looked at mental illness, so especially depression and anxiety in PhD students, and also imposter syndrome, which I'm sure people can relate to, which refers to feelings of self-doubt and fraudulence. And they also looked at the role of social support. And what these authors found was that compared with the general adult population, management doctoral students experience significantly more symptoms of both depression and anxiety. And these symptoms were linked to imposter syndrome. But they also found that support was important. So being able to talk to colleagues and friends and supervisors, that was an important factor as well in helping to alleviate some of those symptoms. So overall, we tried to select articles that looked at undergraduate students, PhD students, early career academics, established faculty. So I think that in the end, it's a special issue that does offer insights for people at many stages of their careers.
I know what I'm going to be reading for the next 1 month.
I hope that people do read it. I mean, I think that's what we were really hoping for when we received, the approval of our proposal from the Journal of Management Education. Neil Ashkenazi and Angela Martin, my co-editors, we really wanted to do something that would spark a conversation. And obviously you can't answer all of the questions in one special issue. And what we really hope to do is to encourage more research into this topic. This is just a starting point. So if we can encourage other researchers to look at mental health and wellness in management students, we've achieved our goal.
Yeah, and there's always a starting point for every conversation, and if this is it, then let it start now, than being left out. So good on you for doing that. And I think I'd really recommend everyone to, especially if you are an academic, go ahead and reading the Journal of Management Education special issue. And if you're looking for a more experiential understanding, then Voices of Academia is your blog, isn't it?
That's
And
right.
you also talked about Twitter. So if you could just let us know what your Twitter account is so people can follow that.
Yes, I tried to jump in with it. It's Dr Marissa Kate. That's my Twitter account. And always really open to talking about mental health and wellness ideas. I do a lot of public speaking around this. I've spoken on Are You OK Day. And I think that I'd love to see more management academics being involved in this space. We have some people doing amazing work. I have to do a shout out to Angela Martin, who's just the most amazing, wonderful co-author and collaborator at the University of Tasmania, who does some great work in this area. And I think that it's a wonderful community. Twitter, in fact, the anecdotal stories and evidence that is shared there is really making a huge difference to people. We have so many mental health support accounts there. We have also Twitter accounts dedicated to minorities. So we really need to hear from people with chronic illnesses, people who have disabilities. We'd love to hear more of their voices. And this is something that we're trying to do with Voices of Academia as well, to get those voices listened to and amplified.
Yeah. Right. So unfortunately, that's the only time I've got today, because we want to leave the curiosity there for our listeners. But I'd really like to thank you for all the discussion today, Marissa. I think we've learned so much, and there's definitely a lot for us to pick up on in this space. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And if you wish to connect with Marissa, like she said, she is on Twitter, and you can Google her. She is from the University of Queensland, so you can just Google in Marissa Edwards at UQ, or you could also email anzam at anzam.org. And that's the end of today's podcast, and I'll be back with another interesting podcast. Thank you.